Уважаемые представители средств массовой информации, уважаемые друзья,
Distinguished media representatives, friends, we have just held a very fruitful round of talks in both restricted and extended formats with Mr. Putin, and I'm very grateful to the President of Russia for finding time in his busy schedule to visit Belarus. It is a very good signal, and not only that, it's thanks to this meeting that we've been able to discuss a broad range of issues on our bilateral agenda. First of all, the economy. You have probably noticed that we have devoted a lot of time to discussing security and defense. As we agreed yesterday, we started with security and defense, and this day was devoted to economic matters. Recently, Russia-Belarus relations have seen an upturn. The level of trust in every area is unprecedented between our two countries. We can acknowledge that our economies are developing dynamically despite the well-known factors that hinder it. We have discussed the nuclear industry cooperation, industrial cooperation, machine engineering and instrument making, and other sectors. First of all, about import substituting production that will allow us to achieve greater technological sovereignty, as it is also very important for our security. I'm confident that the Russian government's work with Belarus will see a smooth succession. There are no outstanding issues between us. There are some issues which require further work and deeper elaboration. We can say that today we have no outstanding issues. All the issues have been resolved. And I'm sure that we will continue our fruitful work going forward. We discussed creation of an integrated industrial policy as part of the Union state. We must do away with the remaining protective and restricting measures. Otherwise, our peoples will not understand. We have discussed transport and logistics, and we are both of the opinion that a serious additional investment is required in this sphere. In recent years, we have taken a new look on regional cooperation and have reassessed its potential. Belarus and its regions are cooperating with all constituent entities of the Russian Federation. We're seeing increased exports of our products, and in June 27 and 28, Vitebsk, Polotsk and Novopolotsk will see a Belarus-Russia event, and we expect you, dear colleagues, to attend the forum that we will be holding, and I'm sure the agenda will be very relevant. We have discussed international issues such as security in the world and in the region, considering the unprecedented level of tension that we have to deal with. And our approaches here are identical. We are heading towards a multipolar world order. I'm grateful to Mr. Putin for detailed information about his visit to China. Belarus is also building relations with Beijing in all areas, while not forgetting its own priorities. We expect that at the SCO summit in Astana in July, we will join this authoritative international organization. And we're grateful to Russians and the Russian leadership including the Foreign Ministry of Russia, for their huge support in acceding to this organization. In conclusion, I'd like to thank my Russian colleague for the kind and open dialogue, for the constructive meeting, that we've been able to find a mutual understanding and lay ground for further comprehensive engagement. Thank you.
Уважаемый Александр Григорьевич, друзья, дамы и господа,
Mr. Lukashenko, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start by thanking the President of Belarus for the invitation to visit Minsk and for the traditionally warm welcome that we have been offered. As you know, this is one of my first foreign visits since my re-election and since the new government formed, and this goes to underscore the great importance that Russia places on its ties with its brothers and allies and true strategic partners. I share Mr. Lukashenko's assessment. Today's talks were very productive, involving the Prime Minister and ministers. We've been able to cover nearly all the areas of our cooperation in humanitarian, economic, and defense spheres. This year we'll have two important dates. July the 2nd will be 80 years since Belarus was liberated from German Nazi invaders. It is our common victory. We remember the price that was paid by our grandfathers and great-grandfathers who fought to ensure our lives and freedom. And we will have an anniversary of the Union State. We've been able to achieve much through our integration efforts. 28 successful integration programs have been implemented. The legislation of our countries was improved, and legal and organizational grounds for a common space were created. The unified monetary and budgetary policies will be possible in accordance with the Union's founding bodies. A decision. New promising areas for integration were outlined. We are now finalizing a plan of concrete steps to deepen our economic cooperation and to minimize the damage dealt by illegitimate Western restrictions to technological development and import substitution. Every year we're seeing increased mutual trade. Russia we're seeing increased mutual trade. Russia are securely protected from the influence of third countries and the negative trends that exist in global currency markets. Russia has invested over $5 billion in the Belarusian economy. Over 2,000 Russian companies operate on the Belarusian market, implementing projects in strategic industries, including car making, agricultural industry, civil aviation. We are cooperating in agriculture. The agro-industrial complex of Russia and Belarus complement each other in areas which are our priorities. Ensures that we can provide our population with food products on a stable basis. Another priority is energy. Our country has been a traditional supplier of oil and gas to Belarus, preferential terms. In November 2023, we've successfully completed a joint project, which Mr. Lukashenko has mentioned, was brought out during the talks many times. It's the construction of a nuclear power plant in Belarus. It is now at full capacity. Its two units have produced over 30 billion kilowatt hours of energy. and we intended to continue helping our Belarusian friends develop their nuclear industry and continue working more closely in related fields of digitalization and nuclear medicine and the accumulation and production of energy. Cargo traffic is also on the increase. In 2023, we saw a doubling of the transit. It's about 400 billion tons. And we expect to grow transit of Belarusian cargoes through Russian territory as well, increasing the capacity of our transport corridors and modernizing our trade and logistical infrastructure together. We also have a multifaceted cultural and humanitarian cooperation. We have educational and science exchanges and programs of patriotic education and the preservation of historic memory. Much is being done to ensure better conditions for personal ties between the citizens of our two countries. Roaming is being phased out by mobile carriers of our countries, so people will be using a home network wherever they are. We have discussed the creation of a unified defense space. Belarus now hosts a joint regional group of forces. Russian defense capabilities, including tactical nuclear weapons, serve to protect our territories and ensure our obligations at the CSDO. We have agreed to hold exercises to train skills necessary to use nuclear weapons capacity. Further coordination of our steps on the international arena was also discussed. We have a common stance on most regional and global problems of today and are offering a mutual support on many international platforms. In this context, I would like to emphasize that Russia has actively promoted Belarus's membership at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which Mr. Lukashenko has mentioned. In June, when the organization summit in Astana is held, all the procedures will have been finished, and Belarus will become a member. This will certainly serve to strengthen the authority of the organization itself, help promote security and stability on the Eurasian space. I also use this opportunity to share my impressions from the visit to the People's Republic of China, which I made several days ago. Speaking with the President of China, with my friend and colleague, we spoke about our cooperation with Belarus too. In conclusion, I'd like to thank Mr. Lukashenko for his hospitality and for the substantive talks that we've had. This visit will serve to develop our friendly and constructive relations going forward. Thank you.
Уважаемый Александр Григорьевич, Владимир Владимирович, у присутствующих журналистов есть вопросы. Мы предложили бы по два задать белорусской и российской стороны.
Thank you. If the media have any questions, the media from Russia and Belarus will have two questions each. Let's start with Belarus.
Обсуждали вопросы безопасности, учитывая нынешнюю непростую обстановку, напряженную и внешние угрозы.
Hello, Mr. Putin, Mr. Lukashenko. You said that you mentioned security matters, considering the external challenges and the fact that NATO is expanding its troops. Will there be any steps to reinforce security within the Union state? And what about the exercises on using non-strategic nuclear weapons? As I've already said, not only do we discuss security matters, but Mr. Putin has just mentioned what matters the most for us. We have a joint force to defend the Union state, and we always keep in mind what is happening along our borders. And we can see this and we know about this. This starts with building all kinds of fences and stirring up tension by holding all these exercises close to our borders. We're talking here about 90,000 foreign troops. Well, what are the Americans and Germans doing there along our borders? This goes to say that security is a major priority for us, and many of our meetings, as you have noticed, we meet quite often. Maybe 90% of our meetings deal with security and defense matters, except for this meeting, maybe since we spent a lot of time dwelling on economic matters, because it is the economy that underpins defense and security matters. As for the exercise you've mentioned, what can we say about this? As I've already said, if you carry a firearm, a small rifle, we must understand that we do not want to attack anyone, but we must be able to defend ourselves. So we need to make sure that we know how to use these weapons. But we're talking here about weapons that are very dangerous, so we need to train ourselves. This is a third stage in our exercises since nuclear weapons were deployed in Russia. Russia has not publicized these efforts before. Maybe they had tens of exercises of this kind before in Russia. So what we're doing things that they've been doing for a long time now. So now they're training us, and they are training foreign pilots. The Americans are training German pilots in Germany. They train them to use nuclear weapons and to pilot planes carrying nuclear weapons. So there is nothing special about this. We are getting ready. We are training ourselves. There is a lot of uncertainty and instability around the world. We must be ready, unlike in the middle of the 20th century. We do not need war. All we talked about here today is peace, and I am grateful to President Putin for including the head of the Strategic Initiatives Group in the delegation, who talked about our near prospects and future. So we're here to talk about peace, but we also must be ready. So there is nothing special about this. Well, I have very little I can add here. Russia has regularly held strategic exercises for strategic and tactical nuclear weapons. Once we deployed the non-strategic nuclear weapons in Belarus, we are now working with Belarus. This is the only difference here. This is my first point. My second point is that for us, Belarus, the security of Belarus is just as important as Russia's security. This is a key element of our cooperation in this regard. As for Russia's obligations in this regard, we strictly abide and by all our obligations. We comply with all of them in terms of arms control. There is nothing we violated here. There is nothing unusual about this compared to the way NATO operates. And Mr. Lukashenko has already mentioned that they hold exercises of this kind all the time involving NATO countries. When there are tactical American weapons, there are military personnel and military assets, and their means of delivery that are used in these exercises. This is business as usual for us. We are not seeking to stir up tension, but of course, this is a sector where we cannot afford any mistakes, and we need to make sure that we synchronize our efforts. This is why we are holding this exercise. So we continue with the Russian journalists. Izvestia, Mr. Putin, Mr. Lukashenko, you've mentioned that one of the key items on your agenda was energy security. And there is a lot we can say about this, but we have very little reports about a common shared energy market, and our colleagues in Belarus have been reporting on the fact that there is a roadmap for moving forward on this matter. What do we expect from this project? What project are you talking about? The common energy market. Thank you. We are working together in three sectors: electrical power, oil and gas, and the third one is nuclear energy. In every sector, we adopted the required decision regarding oil and gas. There are some current matters we've discussed in detail today. There are no matters we cannot resolve. In terms of gas, we agreed on everything for several years to come. And beyond that horizon, we will have to reach agreements that meet the interests of our friends in Belarus as well as benefit the Russian economy as well. We are working as planned, and in terms of energy and electric power, this is also a sector where everything is up and running. In the nuclear sector, the NPP in Belarus is working, and we have a lot of potential for working in related sectors of the economy. As for the common market, we are moving forward on this agenda. I've mentioned this when I talked about natural gas. So we are working as planned, and we have no differences or contradictions. Of course, there may be diverging approaches at the expert level, but once the time comes for us to launch the common market, we will agree on all the relevant decisions. Now we will have a question from Belarus. Mr. Putin, a question on Ukraine. Considering that Vladimir Zelensky's presidential term has run its course, what about resuming peace talks with Ukraine? Who you can talk to, even if Ukraine asks for these talks? And the second part of the question is whether you see any real forces in Ukraine, in its military or political establishment, willing to compromise and ready to reach agreements. This is a question for both presidents. Can I begin? Of course, go ahead, please. Regarding the negotiating process, I've mentioned this many times, and I would like to emphasize this once again here in Minsk. Russia has never rejected these talks. We started these talks some time ago in Belarus. Then Ukraine asked us to move to Istanbul these talks. We almost reached an agreement. We are very close. We had a draft agreement that was ready, and the head of the negotiating groups representing Ukraine signed these agreements. So overall, Ukraine was fine with these agreements, and so was Russia. Of course, we could work even more with these agreements, but if you have a signature from Ukraine, this meant that Ukraine was fine with this deal, but you know the reasons when former British Prime Minister arrived in Ukraine. Ukraine just rejected these agreements and refused to abide by them. Moreover, they said that they wanted to end these talks. We were not the ones who withdrew from these talks. They were the ones who withdrew, and they were the ones who banned these talks and prevented themselves from taking part in these talks. We never prevented anyone from taking part in these talks. We are all for that. And after that, they followed the line traced by the Western sponsors who had this goal of achieving a strategic defeat against Russia on the battlefield. We can now see that there has been much talk lately about resuming talks. So let them resume talks. Let them do this, but not based on what only one of the parties want, but based on the agreements of principle that we achieved during the challenging talks we had in Belarus and in Turkey, and considering the reality on the ground, the situation on the ground, who are we to talk to? This is, of course, an important question for you to ask, and I will agree with you on that. We do understand that in terms of his legitimacy, the current heads of state has little left of it, and I believe that one of the goals of the conference that will be taking place in Switzerland is to make sure that the Western community reaffirms the legitimacy of the current, or maybe not the current, the past president of Ukraine. But these steps, they don't matter in terms of legal documents. Of course, if the need may be, and I do believe that we need to resume peace talks, not based on any ultimatums, but based on common sense. This must be what lies at their foundation. Of course, we need to understand who we can deal with in order to be able to sign binding legal documents. This way, we can be sure that we're dealing with a legitimate government, and it is up to Ukraine to answer these questions. I think this is primarily up to the Parliament, Constitutional Court, or any other government bodies that have the mandate to deal with these matters. Of course, they need to look into their constitution for guidance. What kind of government bodies have the right to act and to remain operational without elections and without holding elections, and which of their institutions do not have this right. And this is about carrying out a legal audit of the Ukrainian legal system.
I agree. I absolutely agree. As to the term of Vladimir Zelensky running out, it is a legally murky situation. They have they're very deep in democracy, as they call it. So we often hear accusations about dictatorship, but here is democracy for you, and no constitutional court or anything like that can step in and fix it. So It is a very legally murky situation. The key issues that Mr. Putin outlined stand. Neither the current president or the future president could address the issues faced by the Ukrainian state and the Ukrainian people. The presidents will not be making decisions on those issues. You know who's making those decisions. It comes from overseas. The evidence was just provided by the Russian president. Some figures arrive from abroad. They give out orders, and the agreements which had been reached and which had been signed in a preliminary form were struck down, and everything went awry. So I've made a point of addressing this issue, but now I see that it's all in vain. And you know what Ukraine is like, both before the special military operation and now. They have a multitude of forces, and every one of those forces holds a heroic status for themselves. So you could support or not support one of those forces, but there are many figures who would like to become the head of the country and to lead it into further war or into an era of peace. So let's see how it develops. I think this year will be deciding what is in store, but we have nowhere to hurry, and our position is very open. We will keep working together. Our final question from RT. Mr. President, President Putin, how can the death of the Iranian president can impact the cooperation at international organizations and regional organizations? And another question is, there is a trend with things happening to leaders who disagree with the West. A politician recently said that he would suffer the fate of the Prime Minister of Slovakia if the Ukrainian law on foreign agents is adopted. How can you comment on that? Well, I cannot comment on what European politicians are saying. They have many commissioners, each of whom is always saying some nonsense, and this is only political nonsense. If what you just said was indeed said, we're seeing increased disorder. We meet that in our work as well, and it's only a matter of a cause for regret. So I cannot really comment on that at length, but as to Iran's foreign policy, it depends on the sovereign decisions of Iran as a state. It's a big regional power, and it plays a significant role in international affairs. I don't think we will face any changes in Iran's foreign policy. The fundamental basics of Iranian statehood are rather solid and firm. We have had good relations with Iran, with its people and leadership. So I don't see any possible changes caused by that. And of course, we count on a succession in Iran's policy with regard to Russia and our cooperation on key issues internationally. I just want to say a few words about the death of our good friend, I met Mr. Raisi multiple times, and I think my Russian counterpart will support me. He was a very kind and open person who could engage in honest dialogue, and who cared for the development of his state and protected the interests of his people. So there are now many discussions on what has happened, and I think Iran will get to the bottom of this. But as a human being, I can say that it was the disgusting position taken by the United States that led to this. First of all, the sanctions. Those bastards, they didn't have the right to impose sanctions against ships and aircraft carrying people. I think they imposed sanctions against Russian ships, and against Belarus, against my aircraft. I don't think Mr. Putin will suffer because he has a Russian airplane, but they impose sanctions against vehicles that people use to get around. This helicopter has existed for 45 years. Maybe it could be used if it was serviced properly, but they prohibited their own companies from servicing it. So it is on them. They're all believers in God, but if they believe, then they should wait for a response from God. This is not how you do things in the world. And this is another point proving that the unipolar world will soon meet its demise. These madmen are bringing the multipolar world closer with their reckless actions. Look at them stealing Russia's money, arresting ships, stealing tankers, arresting goods. They think that they're strong and so that they can do anything they like. But time will come, and they will have to answer for this, even though they're overseas. So, if the helicopter was not influenced by any external force, it is on them, because they forbade the maintenance of the aircraft, and the convoy used 2 Russian helicopters as well, and the Russian-made helicopters were in the same conditions, and they flew through that same corridor without any trouble. Thank you.